Thanks, Natasha. And ready to kick things off with our presentation on sport, tourism, and IP strategy and events. Name of our presentation is Ready, Set, Innovate. So as I mentioned in our opening remarks, the idea is for us to really bring an understanding of rights and what it means just generally in the context of what we do as sports administrators, understand the importance of rights, how that looks, what that generally looks like in a very practical sense, what we do or what we have to do to protect those rights, and then give some just again merge the theory with the practical so that we could leave here with some understanding of what it is we can do in our own little space to be a little more aware of IP and sports. So in terms of the discussion today, we'll speak a little bit about sport as an economic driver. We'll talk about the rights marketplace, right? Then we'll go into TNT in the global event space. We'll talk about tourism and the commercial impact. And then in terms of tying everything back together with the theme of World IP Day, we'll talk about the innovation pivot. And just from a sport and tourism standpoint, what we believe the opportunity for innovation lies in at least from not only a Trinidad and Tobago perspective, but even from a Caribbean perspective, because as we'll see in the conversation on rights and the rights marketplace, especially with the hosting of events, that there's an opportunity for events that are, I would say, indigenous to the Caribbean, and then we could build, right? So, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. Right. So in terms of sport as an economic driver, right? We wanted to frame the conversation on the hosting rights and the economic opportunity that it would bring. So as it stands now, and which we'll get into in one of the other slides, when you have these international events or these international sporting events, which when we look at sport tourism, right, everyone would have their own interpretation of what sport tourism means. And from a event standpoint, we know that events are one of the key drivers for sport tourism, either participation by the teams and the actual athletes, but then also tourists coming to the country or the destination or the region to view whatever that sport is. So understanding what all those the potential that exists between all of those, then you'll have the rights ascribed to it. So in terms of sports as an economic driver, we could look at the different types of impacts over a continuum, right? So I'll start to the right first in terms of the short-term impact. We speak about hosting an event and what if we have to measure what is the direct spend or the direct impact on it. So persons that will be here, whether the teams and the contingents, and or those persons who are following the teams are just interested in the event, what it is their spending would look like in terms of the economy, in different sectors, such as hotels. They come to the country, they have to purchase, or they have to get transport, they have to move around, entertainment, going to restaurants and so on, seeing the sights and so on. With regards to, we here in the Caribbean, so going to the beach, going to some of our major locations and whatnot. So, we look at that in terms of an immediate short-term impact for hosting a sport event. Then we look at from a medium impact, I would even say medium to long term, depending on the scale of the event, right? And this is something that we've seen, especially with large events such as the World Cup or even the Olympics, right? Sporting events are used as, I'd say, an initiator of a lot of infrastructure upgrades, right? So I think the model now is moving from where it was before, where you'd find that countries will be making these large capital investments to build new facilities or do a lot of new builds to host the events. As the economy, generally the world economy has changed, you'll find that there has been a slight shift in that approach where countries are looking more to upgrades versus complete new builds, because it's what is economically sustainable, right? So we have that in terms of sporting events and bidding for the events and saying, okay, we have to make sure from a facility standpoint, we make these minimum requirements. In addition to facilities, there will be the other goods and services that generally a country would look at, service the road infrastructure and so on. You'll find that sporting events is almost like a catalyst for these upgrades to take place. So you would have that happening, right, in terms of the infrastructure upgrades. And this generally, if there's this opportunity to now engage in this kind of activity, it is likely to attract investment, both internal to the market and externally. And then from a long-term impact, right? Once you're able to host these events, or you establish yourself as a destination that is expert now in terms of hosting the events, right? There's a significant level of destination marketing that takes place. Investors, just sporting fans generally, they would look at your destination, look at your country for whatever additional opportunities you have, because you've made that connection, emotional connection, and then hopefully in terms of the field of play, what happens in terms of coming to look at the event. So there's that connection that is made. They are now associated with that event. So we'll go through quickly later on some of the list of some of the events that Trinidad and Tobago would have hosted over the last 5 to 7 years, and we've begun to build that reputation as a destination that could host these major types of sporting events, and that brings with it a lot of benefits in terms of building that resume. And then in terms of an access to international markets, so you'll find now that once you've been able to demonstrate that ability to host these events, you would find that entities, those international federations, or even the different rights holders, they would now look to see, okay, hi Trinidad and Tobago, are you interested in hosting, exercise X or event X or Y? And then it's up to us as a destination within our, which we'll just touch on slightly later on, within our sport tourism strategy, we now need to evaluate and see and determine which are the types of events we would want to engage in based on the benefits, based on the rights ascribed, and what that would mean for our market, right? So in terms of sport events as commercial assets, right? So we spoke about rights, and I think because of the sequence of the presentations, I'll just pause here just to give, from a very practical sense, what the rights are, right? And rights can be described as the ownership of the ownership or the ability to monetize or to derive value from the intellectual property, in this case the sporting events. For events and sport, just generally, there are several different subcategories we could look at. A lot of it will revolve around broadcast, from an economic standpoint, the ability to seek sponsorship and what that inventory would look like. So even that, from a rights conversation, what sponsorship are you able to sell? What assets belong to you in terms of the event? If it is that you're doing the event in conjunction with an international federation, determining what assets the host committee is able to sell and keep the benefit versus what is already included in the contract with the international federation. So again, I mean, it's not difficult to look at examples. If you look at, for instance, the World Cup is coming up. You had Cricket World Cup, in International World Cup, or even the Olympics. You'll hear at least about the Olympic Partner Program. We know about some of those partners. I think I was reading an article recently that Deloitte signed on, Visa, etc. I think Samsung is also. So that as the Olympics, right, they will have their sponsors, their Olympic partners that must be included in anything around the Olympics. Depending on the OCOG or the local organizing committee, they will be given the opportunity to monetize some level of sponsorship rights as well. That will be kept. So again, not to get into it too much, but I just wanted to give you all an idea of some of the conversations that take place. Again, from a commercial standpoint, we have ticketing. Right. Again, that depending on the rights agreement and the hosting agreements, where the ticketing, the revenue from ticketing, who that is given to, hospitality packages as well. who is given that right, who is able to monetize that right, who does it belong to, merchandising and licensing, which is something that, we all familiar with. You go to an event, an international event, it could even be a local or regional event, and being able to purchase authentic merchandise or licensed merchandise that will have the brand, the registered mark for the event. Again, tying it back to why we're here, understanding copyright and IP, making sure that whatever that mark is, that logo, and all the associated categories are properly registered. I know my colleagues at TTIPO will talk a little bit more about that and the process for that. But it's a very important process, because once you have that, it also lends itself for protection against ambush marketing and even fakes, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Digital content and media management. Now you find, I know I mentioned broadcast rights very early on, but even we are going into a space now from a digital standpoint where streaming is threatening. I don't use the word threatening, but streaming is now going to become the more dominant way for fans to consume sport, right? And what that means in terms of our rights protection exercise, what that means in terms of even a rights negotiation exercise, because eventually, if it is that you realize that streaming rights are going to be more profitable than broadcast rights, how that is going to shift the market and so on. So again, just giving you all some concepts that would form part of the thinking moving forward when we look at events and what some of the commercial opportunities lie within it. So from a rights life cycle, right? And again, this is something that will form part of our process moving forward. And so, Trinidad and Tobago, we've spoken about sports tourism being a major part of the strategy for the government moving forward. And this is something that, we're going to be looking at very closely, and something that generally, I know those in your room, I would have seen some of the names popping, would be familiar with it at different levels, right? So, but from a major event standpoint, right? Some of these events that you want to bid for, you'll have the rights marketplace. They'll have these established events, and what they'll say, okay, does your destination want the rights to host this, right? And so what will that entail, right? So you'll have to put together a nice bid, right? And the bid is usually just that document that will have the opportunity for you to determine if you meet the criteria from an infrastructure standpoint, depending on the sport, ensuring that you have the necessary facilities that will meet the international standards, and ensuring that you have the necessary road networks, the necessary transport, in terms of the collaboration between all of those major entities such as immigration, customs, etc. And most importantly, the budget, right? So you'll find that the government is usually a partner in that. And even if you look at some people might say, well, in the international space, it is only private to some extent. Yes, in the NFL, if you look at it, the NFL, you will say that is a private entity. But even when there's a situation where the states, right? If you're looking at the NFL as an example, states that are bidding for the rights to host the Super Bowl, right? They have to go through the same process. And that bidding process would involve private enterprise within the state, right? It would involve the state government, right? So, the US is massive, but within it, they also have their state entities that, sometimes are part owners of the facilities. So they have a role to play in it. And then all of the other services. So all of these stakeholders will come together to develop the bid, to say, okay, major rights holder, and as I was saying just now, in terms of the NFL, this is what we have currently. This is what our marketing will be to ensure that this is a success. From a Caribbean standpoint, it's the same. You'll find out a lot of it would rest with the government and the different agencies. They probably will engage private at some point, but then come in now to pull together the proposal in terms of how they want to execute. Once they win the bid, it is now It is now confirmed via the host agreement, right? And most times, depending on the size, that host agreement will have, the government as a partner, any private entities, plus the rights holder all signing on, and they will say, okay, this is what we agreed to. We agreed to execute on. This is the tournament. These are the parameters in which we will operate, right? Within that host agreement, you will find the different rights. So as I mentioned earlier in the preceding slide, how do we treat with certain things in terms of the commercial, in terms of merchandising, licensing, broadcast. Generally, what are some of the other elements that we need to pay attention to? Because as we'll discuss a little bit later, the contract and the host agreement also helps protect the quality of the overall event, right? The rights deals a lot with the commercial, but the host agreement also will help protect the quality. From we understanding what the rights are, we move on to the activation of those rights. So a lot of the time that would rest on the host committee or the host country, right? How are we going to activate those rights that are proffered to saying us in this case? How will you activate those rights that are proffered to us, right? What it is we need to put in place to ensure that maximum benefit is derived, because at the end of the day, we are seeking to extract or exploit as much value from the rights as we can, because it's meant to have an economic impact, right? And at the end, what is the legacy from an economic standpoint? What have we derived from it? But then also kind of switching hats from a sport development standpoint. A lot of the times when you host these events, yes, it's meant to have an economic impact, but we also want it to have a sport development in terms of inspiring a next generation of persons. Again, depending on the sport, but then also from a legacy standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, establishing the destination as one that is capable of hosting and executing on major sport events. So earlier I mentioned in terms of the rights holders and the rights marketplace. So on the screen here, we just decided to share some of the what we'll term some of the rights holders who we've dealt with previously, and it's from a Trinidad and even a Caribbean standpoint, and just to bring that familiarity with those on the call here today, right? So these are the rights holders who they're the ones who are in the position to give over the commercial or the operational rights to whoever that host country is. They are the ones who own it. And they're the ones who are going to say, okay, based on this agreement, this is what we are going to give you an opportunity to either commercialize or just maintain and ensure with any rights you've created an environment that does not hamper our ability to exploit. If it is that all of it rests with the International Federation, or ensure that you give yourselves the best opportunity to exploit and commercialize, right? So in terms of some of the ownership structures, as I would have mentioned during the course of the conversation, sometimes is centralized. It's all owned by one body. I know everyone, I will anticipate that you all have a lot of football fans in the room, and they'll be waiting or watching on with keen interest with the World Cup that will be starting in, I don't know, that's about 2 months in the US, and they probably would have been seeing these different articles popping up with different states, asking the questions about what they have ownership of, what they with New Jersey, where the New Jersey, the prefecture across there determining that, all right, people are going to have to spend, I want to say as much as 150 US in terms of transport, right? Because what they're saying is that they need to recoup their cost. That has been a very topical conversation there in the US market, because they're preparing to host the FIFA World Cup, in terms of what rights really and truly the states have. Yeah, what rights these states have to monetize. So again, it's all kind of playing out very live, and I would encourage everybody to to pay particular attention and to read the articles and see what some of the conversations are coming out, especially with FIFA in particular, right? Sometimes the rights are split between the federation hosts, and again, and that often that sort of mix right? Kind of varies depending on the organization. If there's a hybrid model, if it's I mentioned earlier with regards to other entities like the NFL and so on, what that looks like when they sign up their agreement, what rights are conferred to the host destination, as opposed to what is kept by the entity, right? Early on as well, I would have mentioned, could go back here in terms of the rights marketplace. I would have mentioned that they're often, yes, we have the international federation. So just in terms of some of the logos we have here, we have the UCI, which is the Cycling Association. We have Cricket West Indies, World Athletics, FIFA, the Olympic Committee. Locally, we've dealt a lot with rugby, International Tennis Federation as well for some of their local events. You'll find those that have are less commercial in nature. They'll be a little more open to sharing some of the rights versus the behemoths like any sort of FIFA tournament. From a rights marketplace standpoint, there also exists in the world of sport, in the world of sport tourism, and determining what is the best event for your market. There are entities or there are conferences, where you could go to as a destination and meet with rights holders. So when I say rights holders, talking people like maybe the World Kabaddi Association, and Kabaddi is a sport coming out of India, right? Very popular. Or the World Skate Union, or the Karate Federation and so on, because each of these international federations would have their own tournaments. They would have their own events that have their own scale in terms of how many athletes that are meant to compete, how long it's able to run. So you'll have all of those different criteria that the events specific to the sport. So as a destination, there's this opportunity to go to these different events or interact with these entities and say, okay, cool. If we use Trinidad and Tobago for an example. So Trinidad and Tobago, we have X amount of kilometers of smooth road. Nobody laugh. Yeah, X amount of kilometers of smooth road. We have a pool aquatic center. We have an international tennis center. We have the Hazy Crawford Stadium with the class one track, and the football field. What does that, if you look at the different sports that can be played there, what does that qualify us for? And essentially, go out there to the different rights holders and say, okay, we have the facilities, we have the interest by the government, what can we bid for? And then that negotiation and conversation starts to see what could be brought to the destination, and within there determining what rights we have that we could now monetize and so on, and then determining what the overall value is. Because even in determining what is we want to happen, yes, there's going to be an economic standpoint that we would look at, and again, what rights within the hosting of the event we could exploit. But then also looking on later, we spoke about legacy, what sometimes these events might do in terms of destination and country marketing and so on. So there's a lot of things that go into determining which event is the right fit, rights as well being a key part of it, but there's also often a bigger picture. But going back to the rights marketplace, there's several different sports outside of what at least us here in the Caribbean might look at from a Commonwealth standpoint. There are a lot of different things that we should be opening our eyes to that might have potential, that might even resonate with the persons in our region, but then two, might have this potential to bring international viewership, either from a broadcast site or even people visiting. So just sending that, putting that out there for us as just points of consideration. Right, so we had mentioned earlier in terms of rights, again, from a commercial standpoint, we spoke about advertising and we spoke about merchandise from media and broadcast, TV rights, streaming, digital, spoke about ticketing, right? What the ticketing pricing strategy should look like. That again, I know I've been part of conversations where the International Federation, they may have one viewpoint in terms of what the pricing should be, because they think it should all mirror the strength of the brand internationally and so on. But then also in terms of the Caribbean context, we have to be able to say, well, listen, we understand that this is what from a commercial standpoint, you may be accustomed to in a different market, but we also have to be culturally appropriate in terms of what we do, what our economic standing is. So again, in terms of those negotiations, that is something that happens regularly when we're looking at rights, what the intention, and again, when it is we looking at international events, the rights that are usually the rights that come with that, what is the expectation at times of the federation or the rights holder, and then us as the Caribbean kind of pushing back and said, okay, no, we get it, but this is what we believe our market could be. This is what, if it is we want to achieve full viewership and participation and people come into the venues, this is what we believe should happen, because we don't want to exclude after we've made this investment and we know we have this plan. From both a commercial and legacy standpoint, we don't want to be in a position where we exclude persons because of, a misunderstanding of what price we should put out to the market. To the intellectual property, I would have mentioned earlier, logos, mascots, slogans. So we will show on one of these slides a little bit later on in terms of the mascot for the Crafter Games last year. This is the mascot from the Commonwealth Youth Games that was held in Trinidad and Tobago in 2023. And I know we would have worked with TTIPO on that in terms of making sure that we register the image and so on of the mascot. Again, that is also an important exercise, because from that, once we have that, then you go on to put in the logos and the mascot's image on T-shirts. People want to buy it. You want to protect against ambush marketing and that sort of thing. Sponsorship and marketing, category exclusivity. Again, what rights you have, what you need to protect, what it looks like, and then all of that is now worked into. I would have made reference to it earlier in terms of the host agreements, but that also spells out how it is we treat with the different categories and so on from a sponsorship and marketing standpoint, and venue and clean zones. And this is something that I think we've become as a Caribbean, and I'm speaking a lot to the Caribbean, we've become a little more sensitized to the whole concept of when they have a talk about a clean stadium and so on, especially when we are dealing with international events that are coming to our region, right? Why they talk about clean stadium? Because these international events are likely to have existing sponsors that will follow them, right? So a lot of these commercial agreements, when you're having an event and it's in a stadium or wherever it is the field of play, you must give some provisions for that, and that clean zone or clean stadium requirement is something that forms part and parcel of a lot of those conversations. So we've been zeroing in on the fact that the rights, the mixing the rights or joining the concept of rights and the economic value, and why it is do we need to have these rights, and what it is we need to protect those rights, right? I would have mentioned earlier ambush marketing in terms of the conversation. Now, when you have these events, right, we anticipate, full stadia, we anticipate excitement, we anticipate the sports, right? We anticipate commercial connection and so on. All of that could and will influence person's ability to either A, view the sport, B, purchase or view the sport on the TV, whether the TV or the phone, purchase memorabilia, purchase a T-shirt or whatever. All of these elements that have an economic value to be derived. Most times when there are sponsors who want to associate with that event, there's a cost attached to that, right? Because they understand that if they make this investment, they're likely to have a return on it because of the expected viewership, participation, etc. What you don't want happening is entities who have not paid to make that association, have not paid or to be given now the rights to activate. You don't want those to be benefiting unlawfully from that association. So again, understanding the rights, understanding what has to be done to protect against ambush marketing and so on, that is going to be a key activity when we look at hosting events and the benefit that it could have in our markets. Controlling the commercial access is another key element. Protecting brand integrity. So I mentioned earlier in terms of protecting the marks in your space. Again, I know my colleagues TTIPO. They'll likely to mention things like the Madrid Protocol and so on, in terms of what do you use to ensure that the logo and the marks are fully protected within your market, and then what it is that has to be done to from both a legal standpoint and then even in stadia. If you don't want persons coming into the facility in any marks of a competing brand, right? What do it is we do to guard against that, right? And so all of those kinds of conversations are now guided by your rights conferred to host the event, right? And ensure revenue exclusivity or revenue exploitation, right? Ensuring that everything that we do is meant to allow us to capitalize as best as possible on the economic possibility of the event. So just quickly, because I realize I may be going over time, right? Just to share some of Trinidad and Tobago's hosting portfolio in the last couple of years. Last year, we would have hosted both the Curved Games in track and field and aquatics. So just to share, so the Curved Games, I think about 53 years. I think we celebrated 53 years. Arguably, right, and the Lord Sebco says it, and I am a big endorser, arguably the #1 junior track and field tournament in the world, right, and that we host right here on our doorstep, right. As a commercial enterprise, yes, it has a lot of sentimental value to everyone in the Caribbean. This is where you more or less see the future in terms of track and field globally, right? You think about Usain Bolt, Julian Alfred, everybody competed at Carifta. From a commercial standpoint, I think there's been an evolution of the product now in terms of broadcast, what potential they have, for terms of broadcast. Usually the ability to sell license and merchandising, the whole role of having sponsors attached to it. So all of that, again, you see that, or we would have been in a position to see that in action in the hosting of these events. You had the RAN 7, so RAN is rugby, again, another what I would say in the Caribbean market, I think it's very niche still, but looking at the event, looking at how it is played, like on the field of play, is sevens, very athletic, very speed based. It's meant to have a high entertainment element built into it, and looking at it, you're seeing that, okay, cool. If it is we treat with sports like sevens, and again, I'm harping on it because it's going to tie into what we're going to close off with at the end. When you treat with sports like sevens, what other commercial possibilities exist in terms of really bringing more finance into it, more sponsors, etc. Right. We have hosted, we've been a host destination for the ICC Men's T20 World Cup 2024, Pan Am Masters, along with the Pan Am Aquatics, Commonwealth Youth Games, and that was held in both Trinidad and Tobago, Caribbean Cycling Championships. And then if you go back to 2022, we also host territory for the ICC Men's under 19, sorry. Right. Just I'm gonna just quickly run through these because I'm approaching my time. Just generally in terms of some of the rights that it's not always the same, but some of the examples in terms of being able to use the tournament IP, depending on the event that we are partnering with. If there's access to tickets and hospitality, broadcasts, if there's an opportunity to share any broadcast, what elements or what markets of the broadcast we're able to attempt to monetize, if it's the free to air versus international, who that rests with. So all of those things, again, are usually spelled out in host agreements, spoken to in terms of the rights that are available. We have mentioned earlier in terms of what we are trying to exploit from the rights in terms of a marketing standpoint, business growth, ensuring that there's some opportunity for economic stimulation. Right, you don't want, and again, this also happens from the the negotiation for the host agreements. You know, when you looked and you say, okay, there's an international federation, we are looking into hosting this thing, and we may have our own suppliers being able to push back and say, no, within our territory, we're able to have our own suppliers from a procurement standpoint, even within our procurement plan and procurement practices. How do we ensure that the benefit that we want to achieve from a host destination, based on the rights that are assigned to it, how do we now negotiate to ensure that there's enough, if not all, but significant benefit that comes back to us because of what we are trying to achieve by hosting these events? Right. So in terms of to wrap up, right? So the rights are fundamental, right? To hosting a successful event, it's important for us to understand what rights we have, what rights we need to protect, what it is we need to do to protect it. Who do we partner with? In this case, as you know, just tying it back to why we're here, you know, looking at the TTIPO has been a ready partner in terms of us understanding what that looks like. If we need whatever legal frameworks we have, and again, just taking a quick pause, when we would have hosted the ICC Men's T20 World Cup, they would have had legislation that was passed at the government level for different elements, but within that was kind of almost reassuring that there's an opportunity to protect the rights that are associated with the event, because you know we don't want to run afoul of anything. So again, appreciating the rights, what they bring, and the ability to at least extract all the economic value from it is important for us to have an appreciation of. The negotiation of the rights is important. And again, because there's often an investment, how do we ensure that the balance between what the International Federation on the rights holder holds versus what benefit it could have for the destination is continues to be important, right? How do we negotiate that? And then, you know, ensuring that we have the right people at the table who's able to really, I don't want to use the word pushback, but stand and say, okay, listen, this is what we're looking at as a destination. If it is we are to host this, we see the benefit, we see the value, but this is what we are looking at, this is what we want, you know, to kind of flex on in terms of giving us the opportunity to maximize on those rights, right? Quality assurance, and you know, the rights generally as well helps in terms of protecting the integrity and the long-term viability of the event brand or the event is executed. You don't want a situation where we don't pay attention to that, and you know the quality of the event, you know, is impacted, right? That serves no purpose. That diminishes the value of the rights, which is not what we're getting at. It's something that we want to encourage, something that we want to ensure that the integrity is maintained so that we could continue to grow it, you know, ensure that we could have more rights and more finance coming into it and build a sustainable system. So tying back to our theme, right, in terms of ready, set, innovate, and this is something that as a company, this is sport now, we feel very strongly about this. I mean, I personally, I feel very strongly about in terms of innovate. Again, and I anticipate that, you know, we have some IP luminaries on the call today, and they will speak about it from their standpoint. But the germane to us, I think one of the key things from an event standpoint is looking at how can we create and own our own events, right? You know, yes, there's the opportunity to engage with international federations and get those events, those existing rights externally, right? But what can we do as a Caribbean region to host, to own, and create our own events that we will have full control of the broadcast, full control of the merchandising, full control of all those rights that you could derive economic value. We protect those rights. We work with, you know, the IP organization within your territory, right? Again, here is TTIPO. We register the marks, we do all that is necessary, and then collaborate internally so that, you know, we could start to build, create a following, and then, you know, make sure that the world understands that we're open to business and invite them to come here and do it. We've done it with different things. You know, we think about Carnival. You know, we could have different conversations on IP and Carnival, but just in terms of us building our own event, proprietary event, making sure that it's now world class. I mean, granted, it's not going to happen. It's going to require vision, but I think that is something that we do have the potential to do from a sporting standpoint. The events that we have, even if it's an innovation on an existing event, I would say that we have enough connections with local federation, well, confederations, and international federations. If again, in terms of confederations, for use rugby as an example, you have RAN, or Rugby Americas North, that is like the confederation, but World Rugby is the international federation. I think there's enough opportunity for us to imagine certain things, and with it, protect your idea, of course, and that's another thing, in terms of the IP element of it, protecting your idea, and then petitioning and saying, listen, we think this might be an interesting way to execute on this sport, right? And you never know, right? You never know. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'd say that is an opportunity that we have. For instance, cricket, they've tried with, I know some years ago they tried with the T10. T10 is now a thing. I know they tried with sixes at some point. Is there another version? We don't know, right? But then again, as a territory, as a region, I think we should encourage ourselves to imagine, innovate, and see, because it's within that innovation, we could create something that is our own, and then derive maximum benefit. Right? So ready to host strategically, set, protect the IP from inception, and then innovate by creating our proprietary events. And that brings to an end my presentation. I was interested. I hope I didn't lose anybody. I hope I wasn't going too fast. And just want to say thanks for your attention, and hope you'll enjoy the rest of the presentations today.